Hello and welcome to Outlook on Air. This podcast is designed to keep you connected with all things Outlook, with special emphasis on our enrichment program and its many activities and services. On this podcast, we'll hear from Outlook associates, donors to our many programs, clients of our services, and much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this edition of Outlook on Air. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Outlook on Air from the Palatial Podcast Studio here at Outlook Enrichment. I'm your host, Dennis Nelson. Glad to be with you. I think we have another fantastic, jam-packed podcast coming your way here, so I hope you'll stick around.
Helping you cope with vision loss and blindness. Outlook on Air.
One of the many ways that many blind and visually impaired people end up coping is by going out and getting a guide dog. And that's exactly what Alex France, our first guest on the podcast, did. He went out and got his yellow lab, Marina, and he's here in the studio to talk about the entire experience. And as you listen to the interview, I think you're going to find that he did a great job of expressing his love and affection for Marina, even as he was interviewing. I really was impressed by it and hope you will be as well. Alex, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself, like where you're from and what you do professionally, that sort of thing.
So I'm from here in Omaha. I grew up in Omaha and went to Miller North High School. And then I went to Midland University, which is in Fremont. And after graduating, I actually I started in Bellevue. I helped as an assistant coach at Cornerstone High School, coaching cross country. And while I was doing that, I took the position to be an orientation counselor for the Nebraska Commission for the Blind, and been doing that for the last little over 3 years.
Awesome. Yeah, you've been a busy guy.
Yeah, for sure.
So when did you begin experiencing vision loss?
Well, I have RP, and so I probably was losing vision before we noticed it. But when we first noticed the vision loss was when I was in middle school playing basketball. I was out on a fast break and a ball went over my head and I had no idea where it was. And when you're missing a big orange ball, that's a little alarming, especially when you really enjoy playing the sport. And so from that point, we started kind of the spiral of doctor's appointments and going to see eye doctors, and was diagnosed my freshman year of high school with retinitis pigmentosa. And at that time, I was still probably like 20/80 when it came to my vision. So was still doing everything very sighted, had glasses, didn't wear them, that type of stuff. And then by the time I was a junior in high school, I was legally blind, functionally blind. Like I took the ACT and did very poorly because I could not see. I couldn't read it like at all. And so that was really concerning. And from that point forward, this diagnosis that I got when I was, 13, 14, we quickly realized, okay, like now you're blind. And I started working with the commission and making sure that I had cane skills, tech skills, all the skills you need in order to be successful.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. So how has vision loss shaped your daily life and independence, in your opinion?
Well, it's certainly different. That's for sure. If you were to ask me the same question, when I was 13, 14, 15, didn't really have a lot of significant vision loss, I would tell you I'm probably just as independent now as I would have been without the vision loss. It just looks different, right? Like, I get around using a guide dog or a cane, and I take the bus or Uber. Whereas if I had vision, I'd probably be driving a Chevy truck. That would probably be what I would be doing. So it's just like a lot of things, like a lot of blind people understand, like our lives they're the same. They're just, we use different tools. And so for me, my independence just relies on using those alternatives.
Sure. So what mobility tools were you using before getting a guide dog?
Before getting a guide dog, I was using a cane, long white cane. Was taught, again, by the commission how to use the long white cane. I didn't use it a ton in high school. And then with RP, I lost a lot of vision, lost some more vision. College, I started using it a lot more because I was going out a lot more. And like I said, just needed that confident tool. And so I was using a long white cane. And And then obviously taking the bus, using Uber, Lyft, those transportation alternatives. But as when it comes to a specific tool for orientation mobility, I was using the cane. Yeah.
Sure. So what made you start thinking about getting a guide dog?
So I started when I first was diagnosed. I didn't really think about it, but then when I started really losing my vision, I was like, oh, I'm blind. Like, I'm losing my vision. I could be one of those people with the guide dog. I was like, that's really cool. That was like one of the first things I thought about. So I was a junior in high school and really thought, okay, I seriously considered looking at going to a guide dog school, things like that. But I met with a gal from the commission who had a guide dog at the time, and she just really sat down and talked to me about the responsibility and the amount of work that it was going to take to have a guide dog. And during that conversation, I realized, okay, maybe right now is not the time. I was getting ready to go to Midland. I was going to be running cross country and track. I was going to have a lot on my plate with traveling for the team, and having a dog on top of that just might have been quite a bit.
Sure.
So I decided to actually wait. And it was my sophomore year of college. I decided, okay, you know what? I think I can handle having a guide dog right now. I want one that can run with me. I had a couple of gentlemen that were mentors to me in the running community who were blind, who also had running guide dogs, and they just talked about that experience. And I really enjoy dogs, and I was like, you know what? I think this would be a really good fit for me. And so I did apply my sophomore year of college and kind of started that journey a couple of years later after I had decided to kind of wait.
There's a question here. Is this something that you had always wanted? And I would venture to say you'd probably say not always.
Well, I think what's important is, again, kind of like I had mentioned when it came to the independence, it looks different. I've always really wanted a big dog. I've always wanted a dog. Now, did I know it was going to be a guide dog? No, not particularly. But I think it's just funny how stuff like that works out, right? When I first started losing my vision, I had thought about getting a guide dog, but I think part of it is being mature and understanding that sometimes there's a right time to do something like that, to get a guide dog, and sometimes there's a time to wait and kind of put that on the back burner for a time being. The benefit of doing that too, for me anyway, was it made me focus on my cane skills. I feel like if I would have gotten one very quickly, I wouldn't have had the time to really focus on those alternatives, and that would have really been a detriment to me. So, but circling back to your question, yeah, I think for the most part, a guide dog, maybe not because I wasn't blind my whole life, but dog in general, yeah, I grew up with a dog and always enjoyed having a pup around. So,
so I suppose you felt it would be a natural fit once the blindness entered in. Yeah,
I was like, okay, this is probably a route that I'm going to want to explore for sure.
Did you have any hesitations at all, like time commitment, for example, cost, lifestyle changes, that sort of thing? Did those enter in?
Well, I think initially lifestyle factored in because I was getting ready to go to college. And so I knew being on the track and cross country team, I was going to be traveling quite a bit and staying in hotels and being at practice all the time. Like that was just a big commitment, and having to have a dog, managing the food, all the scheduling that would come along with having a dog at the same time, I was a little concerned about. But again, I think when you're looking into getting a guide dog, those are things that if you truly want a dog and you want a guide dog, you'll find a way to make it work. If I would have gotten one during that time period, I would have made it work, right? Because that's what we do.
Sure.
When you're blind, you problem solve. You figure out how to make those alternatives work for you, and you work them in your schedule. So I think it's important to be mindful of those things: financials, time management, responsibility. Those are very important things that you need to think about when you're looking at potentially getting a guide dog.
What do you feel a guide dog provides that maybe would differ from a cane?
I will say this is probably one of the biggest questions I get, or maybe what does a guide dog do better than a cane, or something along those lines. I will tell you there is not one that is better than the other. They are different. That's kind of a theme of a lot of how I feel when it comes to the non-visuals versus the visual. They're just different. I always tell people canes are object finders, while dogs are object avoiders. When I'm walking down a street and I'm using a cane, that cane is going to identify, or it's going to find a trash can. It's going to find a bench or a chair or a person or any of those items. Whereas a dog is going to walk me directly around them unless I verbally tell it to target one of those. It'll just walk me by them. So that's the biggest difference. Otherwise, you use them they're basically the same tool.
So let's kind of shift gears here and talk about the application process for a minute. What is the first step in applying for a guide dog?
So I think prior to applying, you need to do your research. There's plenty of guide dog schools throughout the United States, and it's important as the handler to identify what school is going to work best for you. So when I talk about the application process, when I talk about how the training went, my experiences, I really want people to understand that I'm speaking from my perspective, from my guide dog schools, like what I learned when I went there. When you meet a blind person with a guide dog, you've met one blind person with a guide dog, right? Like every blind person with a guide dog is probably going to have different experiences, maybe different stories. There's going to be similarities, but I just want people to know that on the front end, when I talk about my application and things like that, there are specifics to me that have caused, the results and things like that. So for me, I did my research. Like I said, I had a couple mentors who were blind, who had running dogs. I really wanted a running dog because I was a runner. So that was a priority for me. And at the time, there's only one guide dog school that does running guide dogs, and that's Guiding Eyes. And so really that kind of made my job a little easy about finding a school. And so I started the application process in 2020. I had my orientation counselor from the commission come out, and you have to fill out basically an application that asks you questions about how fast do you walk, where do you walk, how far is it. You do videos of where you live to make sure that the housing situation is going to be safe for the dog. You have to do a video of you walking with your cane, showing that you have good O&M and that you have a route that you're going to regularly walk. So I did mine around Midlands campus. And then I also took a video of our rental property there near Midlands campus. And then we sent all that information in 2020. And that kind of kickstarted the application process. And then what happens after that is, they look at your application, and then you'll do a home visit where somebody, for me, because it was during COVID, it kind of threw a lot of my application, it threw a wrench in a lot of stuff. So I got my call, and they said that they liked my application and that they wanted to move forward, and that I would need to submit a medical form just to say that I was physically fit and that I would be able to have the stamina essentially to work the dog. And so I submitted that paperwork, went in, got a physical. And again, this was all within 2020. Well, I didn't hear from them for a while because during COVID, they were short-staffed. Some of the dogs got sick, like just, crazy. So I didn't hear from them for a couple years. So then I called back, I'm like, hey, what's going on? Long story short, it really actually wasn't until last year in the spring, I heard from them, and they're like, hey, we really need you to send in your medicals again, and we're going to have somebody come out and meet with you. At this time, I had already graduated college. I had moved downtown Omaha into an apartment. So my life circumstances had completely changed. I was no longer running for Midlands track and cross country team. I had a full-time job. So I met with my regional rep, and he's like, whoa, okay, you have a lot of differences from when you first applied. And so it was going through kind of some of that, like, what's your life like now? How far do you walk? Some of the similar questions, but we had to reevaluate them again. And so I met with him. I had to resubmit my medicals. And then they're like, okay, well, we'll be in touch when, we find you a guide dog. Again, because I wanted a running dog, the wait time for that was significantly longer, especially because of how fast I run and because of how tall I am. And so they're like, you're going to have to wait a little bit because we're having a hard time finding fast dogs. So when they had kind of lost my paperwork, or they, with all the stuff with COVID, and they asked me again, does the dog need to be this fast? And I was like, at that time, because I had already graduated, I'm like, no, it doesn't really need to be that fast. I'm okay with doing a little slow jog with the dog. That's not a problem. So that, I think, helped me get my dog quicker, because then after I had met with my regional rep, it was like 2 months later, and they called me and they were like, hey, we have a dog. When do you want to come out? I'm like, really? It went from waiting for 5 years to 2 months, and now you're ready for me to come out there. So that's kind of the application process. Again, for me, it was very lengthy, But that's because there's just so many unseen, uncontrollable things that happened that caused it to last a little bit longer. Again, because I wanted a running dog, that also created a little bit of that delay for me to getting my guide dog.
Wow. So I'm just trying to sit here and figure out how long that application process took you from beginning to receiving the dog. You're talking, 5 years?
Yeah. For me, it was about 5 years. Now, the application process itself, it's not like a lot of hands-on doing things. It's more of like sitting and waiting. Mm-hmm. Once you've gotten it done, you basically are sitting there waiting for them to pair you with a dog. It just so happened that because what I was looking for, they didn't have, and then all that, the uncontrollables happened. Yeah, I was waiting for about 5 years. But again, hindsight, I'm really glad that those 5 years happened because it allowed me to get through college, without needing without looking at having a guide dog and doing that while I was in college. I was able to focus on using a cane. I started my job and kind of got into a rhythm of having my job before having a dog and introducing that into that. Part of my job, I had to go through training of learning and using a cane all the time. And that was really beneficial for me, for somebody who really wasn't using it as much. Mm-hmm. To have to use it all the time and learn to trust that really helped me moving forward because I had really good O&M skills. I knew how to use a cane. And if I would have gotten a dog before that, you never know. Things might have been a little different. And so again, I think things planned out perfectly. No, when I first applied, I was kind of annoyed. I was like, man, why is this taking so long? But yeah, for me, it was around 5 years. That's not normal. I don't want people to hear that and think, oh man, that's a long time. Mm-hmm. It definitely varies depending on what school you go to and what your requests are when it comes to type of dog, how fast you walk, things like that.
What was training like for you?
So training, for me, so Guiding Eyes is in New York. So I flew out to New York and it was 2 weeks, a full 2 weeks. So around 14 days of training. Mm-hmm. And, I showed up and the nice thing is it's at a campus. And so all of where you live, your dorm and the cafeteria, the food, all that's kind of in the same building. So you're not really transferring buildings or anything like that. The food was amazing. I know this really has nothing to do with the guide dogs, but I'm just telling you, the food at Guiding Eyes was amazing. They had a chef there that he asked you, he's like, what do you want? And I was like, whatever you make is fine. He's like, and the food was great, but it's all there. A typical day was you'd wake up once you got your dog. You wake up at 7, you let the dog out for park time, which is essentially like relieving time. Mm-hmm. And then you bring it in, you feed it, and then it's time for you to go get breakfast. You come back. Usually you'll do a route in the morning. Sometimes you'll drive to that route. They have vans that they'll take you out in with your dogs, or you'll do a route there locally. Each route's going to be different. You will go to every and any experience that you may encounter in your day-to-day life. So we took the train, we went on the bus, we went in cars, we went in vans. We tried to simulate as much of everything as possible. That way, no matter what you come home to, you're going to be ready and you're going to have experience in it. We went to the mall and went up and down the escalators. We went to the movie theater, which doing that with a dog when there's popcorn everywhere was definitely interesting. So it was just a matter of each route that you do, each experience you do is supposed to prepare you so when you go home, nothing's new. So you do a route in the morning, then you come back, you'll get lunch. Sometimes we would eat lunch out on the routes. So like sometimes we'd go downtown in a local town there near where the school was, and we do a route downtown, and then they had a local shop that we would eat lunch in, and then we'd go back out and do the same route in the afternoon, or we'd come back and we would do something different in the afternoon, like because part of going there, it's not just learning how to walk with the dog, it's learning how to take care of the dog, how to feed the dog, how to brush its teeth, how to comb it, how to, everything that comes with owning a dog, they teach you within 2 weeks. So it's kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant of information. But Guiding Eyes did a really good job of making sure that we felt confident, that we felt that we had, if we didn't have the answers, we knew who to call or who to ask. And you do that for 2 weeks. And like I said, after the first week, you're pretty exhausted because you're going from basically 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. with training, with seminars, with learning how do you advocate for yourself as a guide dog user. And then of course you have to spend time with your dog. You're playing with the dog, you're taking it out, and they had a fenced in area where you could go in, just you and your dog, and play fetch or just mess around, because when the dog is working, they're working. And then once you get back, you take the harness off and they're just a dog. Mm-hmm. And so they need that time to play and to relieve the stress. And so as the handler, that's part of your time to bond with the dog. And so you're going to be doing that as well. So throughout those 2 weeks, you practice and you do different routes to help build the bond with your dog, but then also build the confidence with targeting different, whether, if you're working on stairs or whatever that may be. They did a session where they purposefully attempt to hit you with a car, because it's important for the dog and for you to know what it feels like if a car turns out in front of you. So I'm trying to remember what they called it. It was called like traffic jam day or something. I don't know, something funny. And so you would purposely walk out into an intersection and one of the trainers would pull out in front of you in their car. And the goal is for you to understand or to feel what the dog does in response to that. And they're teaching you, again, it's controlled. So, I asked them, like, have you ever accidentally hit somebody? And they're like, no, we've never accidentally hit anybody. But that is part of the training. And the funny thing is, when I came home, one of the first crossings I did, it happened. A car pulled out in front of us and she slowed down. She stopped. She did it perfectly. So again, it's just, they really take the time to focus on training you for everything.
And then when you add in all those extra details that you were kind enough to do, like, the chef taking time to see what you want to eat.
Yeah.
It's like all inclusive. I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, the entire experience. What surprised you most about the training experience?
I think what surprised me was going into it with I think maybe I didn't understand, or I had a lack of expectation when it came to dogs. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes, like, I hear this a lot where people are like, oh, the dogs are so amazing. And it's like, really, I think part of it is, think of it like blind people. When people see blind people doing things that are what we think are pretty normal, people will say, oh, that's amazing, or you're such a inspiration, right? When we're just doing what we would consider day-to-day things.
Yeah.
To me, when I went and saw what the dogs were doing, I was like, I felt like a sighted person to a blind person, like, wow, they're so inspired. Like, these dogs are so, and it's like the trainers are sitting there saying, what do you mean? Like, we expect them to perform at this level. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was a surprising thing to me, is just realizing, like, dogs are very capable, and with the proper training, and just like blind people, with the proper training and having opportunity to show that training, they are amazing. Like, they can do some pretty incredible stuff, and we should expect that of them. And as a handler, like, I expect Marina to do a good job, because that's what she was trained to do, right? Like, she has that ability. And so I think that was pretty surprising. But then also just Guiding Eyes, the experience I had there, it was really awesome. Like, their philosophy, I think sometimes as a blind person, people can be overly helpful. And I didn't get that from them, which to me showed how much they respected my independence and my ability to be able to get around on my own and not have to have somebody constantly checking up and things like that. And so I really appreciated that. And sometimes that is surprising, because you don't get that everywhere. And so that was really, really, really cool.
So once you receive your dog, what rules do you have to start following especially during the first year? That's got to be important. So when you first get a guide dog, again, I'm going to be speaking primarily towards Guiding Eyes, because this is what I went through. When you get back, the dog is not supposed to have any interaction with any other human. No playtime with other people, no walking, really nothing. And the reason for that is because you're building your bond with your dog as the handler. And so if you're letting your dog play with other people, or you're letting other people feed the dog, all this stuff, well, what is that communicating to your dog? Essentially it's showing them, well, I mean, I might go to Alex for food, but I could go to somebody else. It can confuse the dog. So really a lot of it is focusing on maintaining your bond with the dog, going over the different
training with the obedience commands with the dog, the sits, the stays, the leash commands. That's important to consistently be doing. And then of course all of the maintenance for your dog, combing it, brushing its teeth, all the getting its nails trimmed, all that stuff is really important to make sure that you're keeping up on, and the walking, the rules. I don't know if I would really, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't know if I'd say they're rules. They're more of really strongly encouraged guidelines. This is what you should do. This is really what we would encourage. But obviously, there's some people who have kids and they go home. One of the gals in my class has two kids. She's like, it's gonna be really hard for me to keep them from touching or playing with my guide dog. And they're like, no, it's okay. The goal is to as little as possible. So for me, I kept her on the leash quite a bit when I first brought her home. She was on the leash whenever I'd go to my parents or my grandparents. Nobody else fed her. Nobody else feeds her. But you have to be really mindful that you're reinforcing good habits and good behaviors.
What about things like check-ins with the training school? Things like restrictions on travel, work expectations, and feeding schedules?
So when you come back, they strongly encourage you to immediately implement a schedule. It's really important that you have a schedule down because especially when you're working with a dog, having when I got back, because I didn't take any time to slowly go back into my job. I started the next day. Looking back on that, I don't know if I would do that again because that was pretty overwhelming. That first couple weeks was pretty overwhelming for me. But having a schedule of knowing, okay, I'm going to feed her at this time every single day, and I'm going to let her outside to go to the bathroom at this time every single day. That's very important. Builds routine, builds rhythm in the dog. That way your dog isn't having to go to the bathroom at random times. Now, sometimes that happens. The thing is, the dogs are not robots, and that's important to know. They are still dogs. But building routine is really important. First thing you get back, they do checkups. So I actually had one not too long ago. It was probably back in December. It was my first one since getting her. And they come out and they just see how things are going. They're like, how's walking going? How's the dog looking? Very friendly, just kind of up to date. Super non-professional, just really chill. And they just want to see. Yeah, they just want to see is there anything going on that you have questions about. The beauty of it for Guiding Eyes for me is I also had my trainer's contact information. So I've called the first 2 weeks. I think I called her almost every other day. I was like, okay, I don't know what she's doing. It was just with questions that I had because I was concerned and it was a lot. And so being able to reach out to them, they're always available. They have kind of a hotline that you can call if you have questions. And then the other thing for me, while Guiding Eyes has that support, I have some friends that have guide dogs and being able to reach out to them and ask them if stuff happened, hey, what did you do? Or this last winter, I was really nervous because Marina does not like wearing boots, absolutely does not like them at all. And so I was really concerned. And so I called a friend of mine. I'm like, hey, what would you recommend? What should I do? And that's been super helpful just because anytime you're stressed about something, to be able to go to somebody and feel okay, they've gone through this too, or I can laugh about this with this person because they understand, they've been through it. That's been really helpful in addition to those home check-ins and the alumni check-ins and things like that.
That's awesome. That really is. What about vet requirements? Where does that?
So with the vet, Guiding Eyes provides financial assistance yearly, and then they have an emergency fund that you can pull from if you need to. All of the vet, the food, all that stuff is on you as the handler. I have to pay for all of her food. I don't get a stipend on that. Some guide dog schools do provide that. When it comes to the vet, it's my job to identify a vet that I want to go to, and then they give me all the paperwork. Guiding Eyes gives me the paperwork that I'm supposed to give them that, lets them know what all of the shots are, all that information. And then it's up to me and the vet, from that point on. Obviously, Guiding Eyes is included in that. With Guiding Eyes, with the way they do their dogs, I actually don't own Marina. She's not my dog. She's still the property of Guiding Eyes. So really at any point, they can come in and they can, take her back. The value of something like that is if you have a handler that does not take care of their dog, Guiding Eyes has the right to go in and take that dog back, which I think is a really good thing. So, yeah, so it's always this ongoing kind of partnership. And when it comes to the vet, it's the three of us kind of communicating what those needs are going to be. So, yeah, so for me, once a year, I've not gone to the vet yet. Knock on wood. I have not had to go to the vet yet, but I will be going here in a couple months just because we're reaching a year and she needs to have her checkup. So, so that is something that I will be doing. And she's running out of meds for her heartworm and stuff. So I'm going to need to get that renewed. So
you'll have your work cut out for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is something that people don't realize about owning a guide dog?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of myths. And the number one myth that I've heard with guide dogs is people think, oh, you just grab the handle and go, and like they know where to go. You can say, take me to work, and they know how to get you there. So, yeah, that's the biggest misunderstanding is when I'm working with a guide dog as a team, I am instructing her where to go. Just like when you're using a cane, you as the cane user have to know where to go. You have to know what turns to take. When you're at an intersection, you have to be able to analyze that traffic. Same thing happens when you have a guide dog. I have to tell her to go forward. When we're at an intersection, I have to tell her when it is safe to cross the street, when we're turning left or right, when we're going up into the bus, I have to tell her to load up, or I'm telling her commands to get to the destination that I want to go to. If I don't know where I'm going, neither does she. She looks at me and she's like, what are we doing? Like, are we, she doesn't know. So it's very important for people to understand prior to getting a guide dog, you absolutely need to have good orientation and mobility skills. You need to know how to use a cane, because once you get a dog, that will not solve. If you have issues with O&M, a guide dog isn't necessarily going to solve those problems. So that's probably the biggest misunderstanding, I think, for people.
This is kind of along the same vein, more or less, but what kind of discipline or structure would you say is required to maintain the dog's training?
Well, for one, you need to work it, practice. And, if you don't work your dog, it's just going to lose the behavior. They do the obedience where, you try to do that once a day where you're working through those different commands with the dog. And that, helps its ability to listen to you and to make sure that it's following your direction. But I think the biggest thing is, practice working the dog. If you don't take it out, it's not gonna, like anything in life, right? If you don't practice, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Sure.
So if you're not using your guide dog, you're not doing the leash corrections. Now, I have heard some schools don't do leash corrections, which is interesting to me. But, if you're not correcting your dog when it is misbehaving, because it's not about if it does, it's when it does, you need to correct the dog, and you need to work and show the dog what the proper action that you want it to do. Otherwise, your dog's just going to go revert to being normal. It's just going to, it's not it's like, well, I can sniff. I'm not going to get corrected. I don't need to do that. So it is being a handler that understands what that looks like and reinforcing good behaviors in your dog.
And consistency, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you got to be consistent. Otherwise, your dog's going to be like, well, hold on a second. I sniffed yesterday and I didn't get a leash correction. Now I'm getting leash corrections. What's going on?
Sure.
Exactly.
Sure. So what happens if the dog isn't working out or something changes?
So when you first go to Guiding Eyes, interestingly enough, they don't actually tell you your dog's name for the whole first day, which is super. I thought it was very strange, but then I kind of understood why. And part of that, at least from what I've gathered, is if it doesn't work out, they can pair you with a different dog. While you're going through training, they're constantly monitoring to see, okay, is this working out? Are they bonding? I think more of it is, if your dog is bonding with you, that's a good sign, because you can sometimes work out some of those like traveling things. But if you're not bonding with the dog and the dog doesn't like you for whatever reason, or when you're walking and you're traveling with the dog, it's not working, they will work with you on getting a different dog. Now, if you go through your training and everything's working and you get out into the field and you're working with the dog, I think similar situation. It's having that open conversation. Obviously, they want to try to keep that dog with you as much as possible, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And so that's where, they'll come out, they'll work with you probably in your home and see kind of how things are going. And then if it's still not working, then yeah, they'll take the dog back. I personally have never had that, or like I know of one person that's had a situation like that happen. But from my understanding, at least from Guiding Eyes, is that is not super common, which is a good thing. You don't necessarily want people going out with dogs and having it not work out.
Well, no. How has having a guide dog changed your independence?
It really hasn't a whole lot. It's like I said earlier, it's the same principles. The only difference is now when I go out, I'm using a dog as opposed to a cane. That's really the only difference. Nothing's really changed for them that much. I will say I've got more Uber denials than I did when I was using a cane. That's for sure. Had a lot more conversations with people. I've had people. I worked in the state office building for 3 years before getting a guide dog. I'll tell you, got a guide dog. I've talked to more people in that building in the last 6 months than I have in my first 3 years. So that is one huge difference for sure.
I would think that'd be one of the most rewarding parts of having a dog.
Yeah. The focus is not on me anymore. It's on her for sure.
Is there any particular challenge, though, that you feel?
Well, like I had mentioned, the Uber denials is kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge is the same for blindness. It's education. People just don't understand. People don't understand what they don't know. And people are afraid of things that they don't understand. And so when having a guide dog, a lot of it is just educating people. Don't touch my dog. Like my dog is working. It is, it's unsafe for you to interact with my dog when it's working. People not understanding that it's a guide dog. Guide dogs are very different than service animals or emotional support animals. And people, not understanding, like I was at Shields one day with Marina, and this gal and her daughter saw us, we were walking around. She's like, look, we could do that with our dog at home. And I was like, no, probably not. Like Marina has been specifically breeded to do this. So it's just a lot of misunderstanding. And that is probably the biggest challenge with having a guide dog. But again, those are things that blind people are familiar with. We understand that.
Sure. Overall, how would you say the public reacts to your dog?
Well, they definitely love them. Well, they either love them or they hate them, right? For the most part, people, they love dogs. A lot of people love dogs. And so they give her eyes and want to pet her and all that. So for the most part, it's pretty good. And then, people, I will say the one benefit of having a lot of these emotional support service animals, whatever you want to call them, it has raised awareness to them in general. And so people, to some degree, understand if they see a dog in a harness, they should be providing some sort of service. So in that regard, people usually, they see the vest, they see the harness, they understand, okay, that's a service animal. But that is kind of a catch-22. But yeah, I think for the most part, people are pretty accepting. They're very happy, especially people that I've known for a while. That, oh, we're so glad you got your dog, and so that's been really cool. And yeah, it's been a fun experience.
Have you ever had to advocate?
Well, in Ubers, yeah, that's probably the only area where I've really had to advocate is in the ride shares. When I was living in my apartment, really, that was fine. They totally understood when I told them it was a guide dog, fill out the proper paperwork. Even in the airplane on the way back, it was fine. Nobody really had any questions. And in the Ubers, the thing with Uber, I haven't really done a lot of Lyft, but I had a denial. And from that point forward, now on Uber, you can select for them to know that you have a service animal. And I also have mine. So it does tell them that I am blind. And then it tells them that I have a service animal. But what I've learned to do, because what'll happen is when they're within 2 miles of picking you up, they get the notification that says, this person's riding with a service animal. If you deny the ride, you'll be reported and your account will be blocked or whatever it says.
Sure.
What I've learned to do is the second they accept my ride, I will send them a text that says, I'm blind. I use a guide dog. whatever, because I want them to know prior to that 2 minutes, because if they get that and they come to pick me up, I don't want them in a bad mood. Right. I don't want them like, and it shouldn't be that way, but sometimes it's better to be proactive and not have to deal with those. I would rather have them cancel the ride in advance than for me to have to get into a car with somebody who's like, oh man, I really didn't want to pick you up.
Yeah.
So that's what I've learned to do. And that's really helped. Like, I have not had any issues since then, but yeah, it's sometimes a little uncomfortable.
I can imagine, but it sounds like you handle it well, sir. So
yeah,
that's great. Yeah. If someone listening is considering getting a guide dog, what advice would you give them?
Well, number one, learn how to use a cane if you can. O&M is really important. So number one, don't think that it's a substitute. Just see it as an alternative. And really do your research. Talk to people who have guide dogs. Get to know people who have guide dogs. Ask them about their experiences. Call the schools. See what they have to offer, because each school is going to be a little different. And make sure you like dogs, because once you get a guide dog, I mean, Marina is she is suction to me. So definitely make sure you love having dogs.
How has this experience impacted your confidence or quality of life?
Confidence, I will say with Marina, when I'm walking with a cane, and I don't know, maybe this is just me, but sometimes when you're walking with a cane, you're kind of bracing for impact sometimes. Like, your cane's going to identify things and you'll go around it, but sometimes you're not expecting it, right? And so you're like, whoa, okay, there's something there. I got to go around it. Whereas with Marina, I don't really worry about that anymore. Like, I can just kind of go and trust. Now, she has walked me into a sign before, but for the most part, she's pretty good. And so for her, that has been really nice. Confidence walking through. We have a lot of construction going on right now downtown. With Marina, she just walks me right through that. Doesn't matter if there's fence, whatever. If I'm using my cane, I'll hit the fence, then hit the barrier. Then, it's like, sure. I'm doing a lot more exploring with a cane. With Marina, she just goes for the quickest route. So that's super helpful. When it comes to, you said confidence, what was the other?
Let's see, confidence or quality
of life. Yeah.
That was
well, having a dog, I mean, what more do you have to say? I mean, man's best friend. Quality of life definitely increases the second I got Marina, for sure.
So what was it like, if you can think back just for a minute or two, what was it like the first time that you trusted your dog completely?
So for me, trusting Marina, that was immediately. I think for me, I had an advantage because when I was in college, high school, I ran cross country and track as a blind athlete, and you have to trust your guide. You're running tethered to somebody and you're trusting them to tell you when a sign's coming up, or you're going down a hill, or there's, whatever the obstacles may be. You have to trust in that person's going to give you the verbal information you need before you encounter it. So with that information, with that experience of doing that for so long, getting a guide dog, I was like, okay, this is just like having a guide. Now, Marina can't talk, but she can express that information to me in nonverbal ways. And so for me, it was just a matter of, I trust you, and I got to learn you. I got to learn what you do, how you do it, so that I know how to respond to that. So, right from the get, I think I was a little hesitant maybe, but after the first couple walks, I was like, all right, I trust that she's been trained very well. I trust her to make the right decisions. And again, it's only bit me once when I went into the sign, but a lot of that was my fault. I'll take blame for probably 75% of that. But yeah, I think from day one, I trusted her.
When was that moment, if you can think of it, where you said, this is why I did this?
Well, the first time I brought her home and I was just laying there on my bed with her, I was like, this is awesome. I've always wanted, like I said, I wanted a big dog. I had a little dog growing up, but I always wanted a big dog, big dog I could wrestle with and not feel like I was going to crush or whatever.
Sure.
They just make you happy. And, having her, I was just like, I have a big dog and I can roughhouse with it. And then, like I talked about, walking downtown with the construction, or even when I go up to the bus or any of that, just how smooth it is and how quickly we maneuver and how we can get to destination. It does put a smile on your face. Like when I'm walking home, I think part of it is she's really hungry. So she walks very fast and it just makes me smile because I'm like, wow, she is just cruising. And you're just, you don't even think about it. You're just hanging on, right? You're just going with her. And that is a very rewarding feeling.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it sounds great. The last question on my list of questions was, how did you feel when you first met your dog? But I think you've made that fairly obvious.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Alex, to wrap things up here, any final thoughts that you have or any final things you want to say to anybody that's listening to this, whether they're getting a dog or not?
I think, if you're thinking about getting a guide dog, just make sure you do your research. Like I said earlier, make sure you talk to people who have guide dogs. Yeah, and make sure you love dogs.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here and bring Marina with you and everything. That's absolutely fantastic. You did a fantastic job interviewing, and we thank you again so much for coming today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Dennis.
This is the sound of freedom. Blindness and visual impairment are discussed freely here. This is the Outlook on Air podcast.
Whenever I record a podcast and I interview someone, I always try to ask them everything I possibly can the first time I actually meet with them, because it might be the only time I meet with them. But in the case of Janis Compton, we're very, very lucky because she not only was very, very popular on our past podcast from last month, but she is back again to actually answer a listener question. Janis, I got a letter from a listener which tells me that the last time we got together, we didn't cover some things that we probably should have, and this letter points that out pretty blatantly. So I'm going to go ahead and read you the letter and let you answer the listener's question. The listener writes to us and says, I really enjoy your podcasts. You're always humorous and always excited to be here. I really enjoyed the interview with Janis that you had on last month, but I am left with one question. I am wondering if Janis was a totally blind receptionist.
I was not. I was born prematurely, and so my original diagnosis was retinopathy of prematurity. It manifested itself in my left eye initially, but my right eye was, fairly intact. Mm-hmm. And then at the age of 23, I had a spontaneous retinal detachment in the right eye.
Oh,
and
no.
That's when all the fun began. And I had, a couple scleral buckles, some laser surgery, a couple other surgeries, but to date, now my vision is stable, although in the right eye I do have light perception only. And in the left eye, I have about 2200, I believe. So that brings us up to date in terms of my visual status.
Sure.
So
Now, as you went through these surgeries, certainly, and in life itself, as you grew older, did this retinopathy, cause you a lot of issues along the way? Were there adjustments that had to be made, or how did you handle all this?
Well, basically, I did need to learn to use public transportation since I was no longer driving. That was probably the biggest challenge I had. Mm-hmm. But once I overcame that, then really there is nothing that my vision has held me back from.
Did you have to use any special visual aids or visual appliances and things of that sort?
Okay, for mobility, I just use my white cane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, doing hobbies and what like that, I have a closed-circuit TV to read mail, look at pictures, that type of thing at home. And to do my quilting or my piecing of my quilts, I have an e-sight pair of glasses, and that allows me to focus in significantly on what I'm doing on the sewing machine. Basically, I think that's about all that I have used, other than on my cell phone. I do use my camera to magnify something that I am looking at when I'm not at home. That's about it.
So you can see people and so forth. For example, here, when people came in, that kind of thing, you could see all of them?
To a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think there are others with low vision that will probably agree with me that as you learn people, you learn to look for certain gaits, certain distinguishable characteristics like hair color, length of hair, that type of thing. And so I can't see someone particularly clearly, but if I know them, I can usually pick them out.
And you can always tell that someone is at the desk or something of that sort, especially here. I'm thinking especially here in the work environment.
Yes, unless I'm really, really focused on something else. I do tend to go in get a little zony if I'm really focused on something. But yes, visually, yes, I can tell if someone is there.
Yeah, whether you know them or not, you can at least
whether
tell
I know.
that there's... Yeah, yes, you can tell someone's there. Sure, that makes sense.
Yes.
Did you use any of those visual aids, things like e-sight glasses or CCTV or anything like that here to help with any kind of documents you had to work with?
Largely, I used Zoom text that was installed on my computer. That's the only thing I can think of right offhand that I used for my daily tasks.
I'd say that's pretty good.
It made the job pretty seamless, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as we've already talked about, you did it well and for many years, and we're so happy to have had you. I want to thank you for being willing to come back and have Janis interview number 2 here to just kind of fill us in on some of that visual aspect of things, just because I wasn't familiar 100%. And oftentimes when I interview people, I don't always think of their blindness or visual impairment. And you had that, and I'm glad you explained it, because you probably did a better job than I ever could have.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm rather surprised that I didn't think to address that question in the first interview. So my apologies for that, but I hope I have cleared that up. And as always, it's such a delight to speak with you and, to think of my Outlook family, and I miss you all very much and think of you often.
Well, thanks again for coming by. We sure do appreciate you taking the time, because even though your time is yours now, all the more reason you wouldn't necessarily have to. So we're glad you did.
Well, thank you. Always a pleasure, Dennis.
Well, folks, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition of Outlook on Air, but we certainly hope you've enjoyed the program. We hope to see you back here again for another edition of Outlook on Air. And if you'd like more information about Outlook Enrichment, or anything Outlook for that matter, make sure you visit our website at www.outlooken.org. That's www.outlooken.org. Or you can always call us for more information or to schedule any kind of an appointment at area code 531-365-5051. That's area code 531-365-5051. And don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter so that you can find out when the next podcast is available. And we hope to see you then on the next edition of Outlook on Air.